All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Just a couple of housekeeping rules before we kick things off. Everyone should be muted as you enter this meeting, but please make sure to keep yourself muted, keep your video off, just to avoid any background noise. We are recording this session, so you will receive that recording following this webinar. And please use the chat feature for any Q&A. We will try to get to those at the end of the program. Now I'll kick things over to Ted Hart, President and CEO of CAF America. Take it away, Ted.
Thank you so very much, Amanda, for that introduction. We are here today for our next edition of CAF America's webinar series, continuing the conversation, Corporate America Responds to the Coronavirus Global Pandemic. With us today, and we'll go through each of these slides, Anur Giardini is here as Program Officer of Citi Foundation. We also have here with us today, Amanda Marvell is here as Head of Community Programs at Biogen, and Stacy Smita is here with us, Senior Manager, Grants and Community Engagement at Cargill. Let's go on to the next slide. We're going to keep going through. Let's show the slides for each of our speakers. There we are, and now we're there. Amanda and Stacy. Next slide, please. CAF America is a 501c3 nonprofit public charity here in the United States. We serve as a donor-advised fund and also provide restricted funds for donors, corporations, foundations, and individuals. Everything that CAF America does in our international and domestic grant-making services stem from what we call the 3 R's. Regulatory compliance with relevant legal frameworks in the United States and Canada, as well as 120 grantee home countries. Risk management of all international grant making, and our deep due diligence and protocols at CAF America seek to protect the reputation of donors who are taking on inherent risks of cross-border giving. Next slide, please. CAF America has a worldwide reach. We grant to over 110 countries. We have 1.8 million eligible organizations. The reason that we maintain that kind of eligibility is so that donors can put their money to work where it is needed most. CAF America over the last few years has donated and worked with our donors to move over $1 billion of charitable contributions from the United States to all parts of the world. Next slide. Today, our corporate donors will be speaking to you and sharing with you from their own experience of the decisions that they have made, the experiences that they have had, and the impact that they're trying to make. What you will hear today is a story of flexibility, impact, and new models for giving. What I wanted to share with you today is never before has humanity faced a global pandemic in which global philanthropy has played such an important part. Throughout this crisis, CAF America will continue to provide timely information donors need, particularly how charities are coping and how donors can make impactful gifts in support of communities around the world. The world funding of charitable organizations and efforts on the ground is a true tapestry of methods and approaches and impacts, and you'll hear that from our panelists today. There's no one-size-fits-all approach to the problems facing communities throughout the world. As was noted in Betsy Morris's article in yesterday's Wall Street Journal, nonprofits are reeling from a loss or static revenue and soaring demand. Across the country, nonprofits of all types and sizes are in trouble. They are canceling major fundraisers. Most charities operate on a razor-thin margin even in good times. As the virus has sapped revenue for nonprofits, it has also hit them with a double whammy and driving up their costs for masks, cleaning supplies, technology, and food, which further restricts how many people they can reach. Today, it's my pleasure first to welcome here to this webinar Amanda Marvell, who is representing Biogen today as their Head of Community Programs. Please, Amanda, share with us what decisions are being made and the experience of Biogen's giving around the world today.
Thank you so much, Ted. I'd like to start us off with a brief introduction to Biogen. So Biogen has led innovative scientific research over the last 42 years with the goal to defeat devastating neurological diseases such as Alzheimer's, multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's, and ALS, among many others. Our team of scientists, researchers, and medical professionals are focused on identifying treatments and cures for these diseases to not only help those in need, but as the population around the world ages, to reduce the societal burden that these diseases cause. We are a global company with teams in 34 countries and are centered around the ethos of caring deeply, working fearlessly, and changing lives. Next slide, please. So this ethos extends to the ways we're engaged with the communities where we live and work. At the Biogen Foundation, we're focused on making an impact beyond our medicines with 3 foundation pillars: caring deeply for neighbors in need, which includes supporting broad humanitarian needs for vulnerable populations in our community; working fearlessly to care for caregivers, tying back to the Biogen focus of researching and developing therapies for neuro-related illnesses; and changing lives through science, supporting and inspiring the next generation of scientists, which includes equitable access to science education, hands-on learning, and teacher education and training. Next slide, please. So Biogen's COVID-19 relief efforts began back in February with early support to the Chinese Red Cross to help in Wuhan. We were continuously monitoring the situation and realized that we would need to mobilize an even larger response. And in early March, we announced that the Biogen Foundation was committing $10 million to support global relief efforts on top of our traditional yearly foundation grants. We determined that the best way we could make an impact was to take a community-first approach and focus on 3 needs that were very evident at the beginning of the worldwide outbreak and are still very much challenges today. 1, addressing immediate needs like food and shelter. 2, easing the burden on healthcare systems, ranging from providing personal protective equipment, telehealth options, and supporting healthcare workers' daily needs like childcare. 3, increasing access to testing, particularly outside of the hospital setting. So in the US, we mainly focused our giving on Massachusetts and North Carolina, where our headquarters are and the flagship manufacturing facilities are located. But we knew that this was equally important to provide relief and support in our affiliate countries. Just to give you a little context, prior to COVID-19, the Biogen Foundation had a limited worldwide footprint. But because we recognized that this was an unprecedented time, we knew we needed to take an unprecedented approach. So we were working to give to NGOs in every country that Biogen has an office. To date, outside of the US, we're providing grants in 30 countries to 33 NGOs. We relied on our colleagues in the country offices to help identify reputable organizations, as well as CAF America to help vet these organizations to ensure that they were doing impactful and meaningful work. So this is a huge task. Thank you so much, CAF, for all your help. Our overall giving strategy was to identify organizations that can make an impact. We knew that if we could get our grants out quickly, we might be able to help NGOs leverage our funds for additional funding, and in some cases that was able to happen. This required us to update how we handled our finances, but with a few changes, we were able to pay US grantees within a week of after being approved and have been expediting our payments to international grantees. We also wanted to make sure our donations were having a measurable impact. We look to have a balanced giving portfolio, ensuring projects were reaching a large amount of people or were reaching deeply in a single focus area. In addition to the $10 million commitment, we approached COVID-19 relief holistically by providing employee support, donating in-kind supplies and equipment, and encouraging volunteering and matching employee donations to nonprofits. Next slide, please. At this point, we have identified all of our partners for the immediate COVID-19 relief. I want to take a moment to thank all of them for their amazing work. I can't even make a dent in explaining the impact that they're having, but some of the images on these slides are just a few examples of grantees like the Durham Public Schools Foundation in North Carolina, which is partnering with local restaurants to provide meals to food insecure school children and families. The Greater Boston Food Bank, which has been able to adapt to a 50% increase in distribution demand. Wake Med Health in North Carolina, which was able to immediately roll out telehealth offerings and are working with the Triangle Family Services, another foundation grantee, to support homeless populations. the Boston Healthcare for the Homeless program, which set up tents to test residents of Boston who are homeless, easing the burden on hospitals. And internationally, we've donated to Red Cross chapters in 11 countries, and the Italian Red Cross was able to use their funding to help clean and sanitize vehicles that were transporting patients to hospitals. You can read more about the work of these organizations and others by visiting the small URL at the bottom of this slide. All right, next slide, please. As we move forward out of this immediate response, we've begun to focus on the Biogen Foundation's 2020 goals. We know that COVID-19 will continue to remain a priority this year and most likely beyond. So we are working with our longstanding grantees to better understand how they're adapting to this new normal. As a result, we are adjusting our own foundation strategy to deliver on our mission with the parameters of this public health emergency. We're pivoting our 3 foundation pillars throughout 2020 to continue to address COVID-19 by reinforcing our community commitments and supporting humanitarian needs in vulnerable populations who have been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. We know the role of caregivers that caregivers are playing in COVID-19 is quite remarkable, so we want to focus on supporting frontline caregivers, especially those in nursing homes, to make sure that they have the protection and the support that they need. And then finally, STEM education might look a little bit different now, but our commitment to providing equitable access is unwavering. We're working with the Biogen Foundation grantees who are adapting their programs to be virtual and who are also offering a holistic approach to learning that isn't just about education, but making sure that youth have their essential needs met and are set up with the right tools to learn. This might require adjusting funding, but we're working really closely with each grantee to understand their needs and to be quite flexible. Additionally, the Biogen Community Lab, our on-site premier science education programming, is working to transition to virtual learning programs too. So we've already begun to view new grant requests through this COVID-19 lens and are prepared to pivot and continue to adapt. For more information on Biogen and the Biogen Foundation, you can visit biogen.com or email us at foundation@biogen.com. Thank you for letting me share what we're doing.
Thank you, Amanda, very much. And everything that you shared with us goes back to that message of flexibility, impact, and new models. I'm just wondering if you stay with us just for a second, Amanda, before you go away, just to ask you, as you go through these slides and you think about the journey that Biogen has already been on and that you have been a big part of, what's sort of foremost in your mind in terms of the next step, the next 3 to 6 months?
So I think really listening to our partners and collaborators, I think as you mentioned earlier, we recognize that nonprofits are really vulnerable right now, and the grantees that we have been supporting for a while, we value their work that they're doing in the communities, and so we're working hard to make sure that they are continuing to stay around and to have programming into the future as we come up out of this pandemic.
Thank you again, Amanda. Our next presenter today is Stacy Smita, Senior Manager, Grants and Community Engagement at Cargill. Stacy, you have been thinking about and planning for the entire approach to Cargill's fundraising. Tell us how that's changed and the journey that you've been on over the last few months as this global pandemic has gripped the world.
Thanks, Ted. I think one of the approaches that we have taken is really at a global lens. As a global company, we have always contributed globally, but I think this has also made us realize that it's really our operating communities where our employees live and work that we need to be sure that those communities are thriving just as much as our global partners are as well. And so I'll talk a little bit about how we really have really supported, I'm going to say, our hyper local communities with smaller grants, and then enabling them to be able to continue services in a time of need. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay.
Just
So
say next slide when you need the next slide, and it will be put up for you.
Okay, thanks. Just a little bit of background of who Cargill is. From the slide, you can see that we are a company of 160,000 employees across 70 countries. Our business segments really cross against the agriculture, food, animal nutrition and protein, and financial and industrial. We are a privately held company and have been operating for more than 150 years. When we look at our corporate responsibility focus areas, we really have 3 pillars that are around nourishing our world, which is food security and nutrition, protecting our planet, which is our sustainability work, and enriching our communities, which is really our employee engagement and disaster relief efforts. Last year, we contributed $61 million across 56 countries. Next slide, please. So you can see then on this slide where we really have talked about our commitment. Our commitment is $35 million to COVID relief and recovery efforts. We are really addressing food security and emergency medical response, support for our agricultural communities, and food industry workers. Our response is definitely aligned with our mission of feeding the world in a safe, responsible, sustainable way, and is really focused on ensuring access to safe and nutritious food. As I mentioned, the primary focus areas for us are around food security and nutrition, and that's really contributing to food banks and nutrition programs. The health and safety programs are investing in rural health programs and donations to healthcare workers on the front lines. Agricultural communities is where Cargill has business operations in communities around the world and really contributing to the resiliency of farmers and ranchers. And our support for food industry has really been relief for food industry employees with the funding going to the National Restaurants Association Education Foundation and to their Restaurant Employee Relief Fund. So Cargill really has a mix of funding when we talk about it. So we have corporate contributions, we have business contributions that are really reaching the local and national and global organizations. And then here in our Twin Cities community here in Minneapolis, we have the Biogen Foundation that is providing immediate relief here. So as I talked about, hunger and food security has really been our primary focus with partnerships globally. So as I mentioned, food banking and access to food across all regions of Cargill has been really critical for us. We have definitely been leveraging our existing nonprofit partners and NGOs partnerships at a global and regional level. This was really something that the team felt was really a best practice for us in order for us to expedite and ensure swift deployment of resources. We didn't want organizations to be waiting months to receive funds, and so having those existing partnerships and knowing that they had been vetted and had the due diligence done on them, we knew that that was the right approach for us. We heavily relied upon our global corporate responsibility team members to help us work with the businesses to assess partnerships and make recommendations for funding. And we definitely wanted to balance corporate contributions from a global lens and regional, and also, like I mentioned, the hyper-local grants. And those are really what our businesses on the ground are contributing to. What we also have is we have an internal matching program where we match business contributions. And so we adjusted that application where we are now matching 1-to-1. And the minimum contribution on that is $2,500, which was a shift from matching a 50% contribution, and the minimum amount was $5,000. So we really wanted to be sure that we were elevating our commitment to our local communities where our employees live and work. Next slide. And then this final slide just really talks about Cargill's commitment. We will remain the same through all this, feeding the world, keeping our employees safe, and supporting our partners and communities. As I've mentioned, we've committed $35 million to immediate and long-term recovery efforts. Along with this, we've also donated over 3 million pounds of food globally, as well as ingredient donations such as glycerin to aid the development of hand sanitizer. And then just in the next couple of weeks, probably by the end of May, we will be launching a global employee disaster relief fund that will provide financial support for employees that are directly impacted by COVID, testing positive or experiencing financial hardship because of COVID. This was a program that we had in the works for over a year. With COVID deploying, it really accelerated the need for the program. And then in addition to COVID support, we will also be having resources to personal and natural disasters, such as hurricanes or house fires. And I just wanted to spend a little bit of time just kind of talking about kind of the mechanics behind it. And so really early on, shortly after the break of the pandemic in January, February, and early March, the corporate responsibility team agreed to really a central approach to our grant making response, meaning that all requests that we were to receive corporate funding would come through an online application process. And then was from a small team here in our headquarters office would be reviewing those applications. We took an approach where we condensed our normal corporate application to a much streamlined approach that the corporate responsibility team member would complete that application. We weren't, this really allowed us to not accept unsolicited proposals. Again, keeping with our factor of sticking with the partners that we had currently been working with. And decision making is ongoing on these grants. And so we really wanted, again, to these responses to be quick and really be able to facilitate the funds in a timely manner. We also worked with CAF America to facilitate all of our grants that are outside of the US, where we do not have a global NGO that we're partnering with. So we are grateful to that team and helping facilitate and be immediate response for many of our contributions globally. Just to give you a little bit of a sense of the volume, I think it's important that kind of we recognize that as well as in the last 6 weeks, we've processed 375 grants for COVID relief. When we compare to that last year, the entire year, we processed just 350 grants. So we did an enormous amount of grant making in just the last 6 weeks. It is also our fiscal year end here is May 31st as well. And one last point I really just kind of wanted to make too is as our fiscal year is coming to an end here, many of our global and regional partnerships are up for renewal. And so the program team has really been having those conversations with them and having conversations to figure out if we needed to shift some of the funding expectations. Do we needed to change the impact goals? We really have worked hand in hand with our partners to be able to be flexible in this time of uncertainty, knowing that some of the dollars and resources would be allocated potentially to COVID relief, knowing that some programs were probably put on hold. And it's been interesting because they've been grateful, and we really have heard great response from our partners as well through that. And we've only just extended to just a few new partners, and really those partnerships were to address a gap in our funding priorities, such as our farmer and rancher resiliency efforts. And so we really have not been needing to spend a lot of our time and resources on exploring new opportunities. We've really been able to focus on our current partnerships. What can we do to elevate them and to have them have COVID response? That's it for me. Thank you.
Stacy, thank you so much for a very thought-provoking presentation. Of course, we've known Cargill for quite some time, and you have, as a company, always put food security and nutrition foremost. I wanted to just ask you to stay with us just for a second, because in some parts of the world, they're already experiencing a second wave of the virus. But whether there's a second wave in all parts of the world or not, one of the next waves that will be sort of in the wake of this virus, it seems, will be hunger and starvation. Some parts of the world are already concerned about this. We just received a report this morning from South Africa that the starvation and hunger in South Africa actually eclipses the effect of COVID-19 in that country. You have moved more grants in the last 6 weeks than you normally do in a year. You have streamlined your process to focus on your partners. Give us a little bit of a sense inside Cargill. It seems that what comes next is right at the heart of what Cargill stands for.
Definitely, Ted, and I think that, you know, as we look at kind of, I'm going to say the next phase, which is recovery, I also feel that we're going to have some resiliency in that area as well, because we know, as you just mentioned, in some of our other countries, and even here just in the U.S., I mean, hunger is a crisis. It's not going to go away. And so I think it's what can Cargill and other food companies do to ensure that globally, food banking partners and those sorts of organizations, humanitarian organizations, have the right tools to be able to provide adequate food and the right food to the families that are in need.
Absolutely. Thank you for the wonderful work that you do. Our third panelist today, Anwar Giardini, is here with us. He is a program officer at Citi Foundation. Citi Foundation has been in the forefront of many of the troubles around the world and helping so many different charitable activities. Please share with us what is changing, what is the same, coming back to what we talked about before, flexibility, impact, new models. Help us learn from Citi Foundation.
Thank you, Ted, and thanks for the kind words about the Citi Foundation, and thank you for putting together this conversation. I think it's so valuable, and we're so happy that the Citi Foundation can be a part of it. Before I jump into speaking about our COVID-19 response and the points you raised, Ted, I'll just very briefly give an overview of the Citi Foundation, just for those that aren't familiar with us. Our mission is to promote economic progress and opportunity for low-income people around the world. And we do so in 3 ways: by catalyzing job opportunities for youth, by increasing financial inclusion and capability, and by reimagining approaches to building economically vibrant cities. Can we go to the next slide, please? Just very briefly again, we're an independent entity that is funded by Citi, the corporation, to make a positive impact in the communities where Citi does business. So that means we have a presence in more than 85 countries around the world, really making something like this, a global crisis, very much something relevant to us, and that takes on a new impact. And then if we go to the next slide, now into COVID-19. I guess I'll start by saying I think this moment has really pushed us to think more deeply about our role as a partner and a funder. Unlike many of you, unlike the panelists on the call, we have adapted not just our funded strategy, but also the way we do our work and the way we fund our partners. And I think when it comes to the foundation, we can think of it in 3 avenues. On the one hand, we have redirected our funding largely to immediate relief and really providing support for basic needs out there. I think with an understanding of the crisis and what the most critical needs are, we just knew that we had to shift our funding away from our traditional focus areas into what was most needed. So internationally, we're working with partners across the world to provide access to food security, temporary shelter, health and sanitary services, and other basic needs that low-income communities are facing around the world. Along with not just shifting our funding strategy, but also our process, we have worked very closely with CAFA to simplify the way we do our grant business. That has meant for us simplifying our grant application, easing reporting requirements for grantees, as well as expediting our process to get our grants out the door faster. And CAFA has been really, really helpful as we have sought to strike a balance between getting the information we need to make a good funding assessment and maintaining a strong level of due diligence, while also at the same time easing the burden on grantees and making the process overall easier on them. The second tool we have deployed in our response is flexibility. And this is, I think, Ted, what you've emphasized. We have had ongoing conversations with our partners to really understand the way that the crisis has been impacting them and their communities. And based on these conversations, we have given them the flexibility they need, not just to respond to the crisis, but also navigate the crisis for themselves as organizations that are also being affected. This has looked different ways. I mean, for us, it has meant letting our partners make adjustment to program timelines and requirements. It has also meant liberating them to reallocate funding to either shift their program activities to respond to the crisis, or in some cases also shift funding to maintain their operations going. And when applicable, we've also allowed them to make changes to program objectives and scope and really change the kind of requirements and impact that we're seeking from them. And again, here, CAFA has been very helpful in helping us figure out how to best process these changes and track these changes, while again, making it easier on grantees in a time when they have a lot going on, and we certainly don't want to add to that. And lastly, the third way we're thinking about this, and I think this is the one that keeps evolving and will continue to evolve over the next few months, if not longer, is how can we be as supportive as we can, as a partner for organizations going forward under this new reality that we're living in. And for us, it's about, we're still determining how it plays out, but again, it's just that focus on support and making life easier for grantees. It may look like not just funding our programs with a new lens, but also really focusing on strengthening the capacity of our partners so that them and really the sector as a whole can adapt, but also grow stronger and more ready to respond to the many challenges coming our way. Again, I think this will take the shape of supporting the capacity of our partners, changing our expectations and the kind of impact that we seek from our programs, but also just changing the way we do our grant making, the kind of impact that we track, the kind of burden that we put on our grantees as we do so. I think, the larger point that I'd like to make is that as a foundation, really as individuals, we don't choose to get caught in the middle of breakdowns like the one we're all facing right now. But we do look forward with optimism to working with our partners, including CAFA, to turn this breakdown into a breakthrough moment for the sector. I think that is where we face a choice. And with that, I'll turn it over back to you, Ted.
Terrific. Thank you all. I want to share with you several resources that are available to you at cafamerica.org. You will find CAF America's SDG giving landscape, where we give you a global view of what donors like you, corporate donors, are doing in support of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. As many of you know, last month we issued the Charities Facing COVID-19 Worldwide Report, known as the Voice of Charities Facing COVID-19. That was a report that told the story of 544 organizations in 93 countries and what they were facing very early on in this global pandemic. Tomorrow, we will issue Volume 2, all new research representing 122 countries. And in this next, The Voices of Charities Facing COVID-19 Worldwide Report, we will hear very much about the stories that our panelists today have been supporting, what is happening on the ground, how they can make a difference, and what charities are facing and providing support. At cafamerica.org, you will find the COVID-19 response page, where we provide information on 236 fully vetted, eligible charities who are providing COVID-19 relief on the ground in 48 countries. CAF America's webinar series will continue, as I shared with you tomorrow. We will issue Volume 2 of our Voices of Charities report. And then next month, we will be back with our Volume 3, which will look very much at some of the issues that were brought up today. And that's the strength of the sector, the viability of the sector, exactly the stories that we are hearing from charities today. And then please turn to our Caring and Funding podcast, which continues its series From the Front Lines of Philanthropy, questions that you have and answers that you need from our advisors on the front line here at CAF America. Let's go to the next next slide, we do have some Q&A. I just want to take a look at the Q&A that we may have here from everyone here. Let me go over to that page. There we are. Okay, I do want to get right back to our panelists, and I want to specifically ask you to sort of reflect, and we'll go around each of you individually and ask you to give a reflection to one of the statements that I made when we first started the session here today, and that is, never before has humanity faced a global pandemic in which global philanthropy has played such an important part. Let's go back to Amanda Marvell. Amanda, specifically when you look at that intersection of global pandemic and global philanthropy, tell us what that means to you.
I think in order to think about that, you know, typically we've been thinking about where we live and we work in order for us as a Biogen Foundation to focus our giving. But I think that this has really broadened our scope and has brought this to light that this is a situation that we are all facing, and we're all in this together. We're all one humanity. And so the Biogen Foundation looked at this effort and decided to approach that, making sure that we were hitting across the globe, knowing that everyone is being impacted by this pandemic.
Thank you, Amanda. Stacy, picking up on Amanda's point there that we're all one humanity, Cargill has been supporting charitable causes throughout the United States and around the world for years. Your focus on humanity on the ground, this food security and nutrition, caring about communities and farmers, those that are on the front line of food security. I'd like to ask you to sort of reflect on this crossroads of global pandemic and global philanthropy.
Yeah, I think we, you know, as you mentioned, I mean, Cargill's been doing global grant making for a very long time. So it was not so much the mechanics of how we were going to, you know, deploy the dollars, but it was really around ensuring that our partners were feeling valued. Many of our employees have been impacted as well. And so it's all around, for us internally, it's people first. And what are we doing to ensure that our employees are having some resources as well. And as we are across, really, I'm going to say the supply chain of from the producer to the farmer to the food on your table, we're really across the supply chain as an organization. And so, yes, indeed, it's our employees, but it's also ensuring that our farmers have the proper tools to continue to be able to plant, and they're, you know, the food security aspect of that, ensuring that our ranchers are able to continue to do their ranching, young leaders of agriculture continuing to be able to thrive in this area, and then ensuring that just families around the world are continuing to have food on their table, which is so important in times like this.
Thank you, Stacy. And you are, when you and Citi Foundation think about this crossroads, and of course, Citi being a very global company, and your giving has been for a very long time, had very much a global philanthropy lens to it. Now, bring to that lens global pandemic. How does that work, and how does that fit for you?
I think for us, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Anwar.
Yeah, I think for us, Ted, it's an emphasis on flexibility. As you say, being so globally stretched out, we find that the needs of our partners in the communities where we're trying to make a difference vary so vastly, and different places of the world and on a different timeline when it comes to the way the virus is evolving and its impact is evolving. So for us, it's really being flexible in the way we fund and presenting that flexibility to our grantees to understand what it is they need, where they find themselves on kind of the curve and the trajectory, so that we can be as responsive and supportive as can be.
Terrific, terrific. We have a question that came in from our webinar audience today. I'm going to ask this of each of you. Amanda, we'll come back to you first. This question is asking about how each of your foundations are using gender, race, other types of data to inform your responses and next steps through the end of the calendar year. So, I take that question very broadly in terms of what data are you looking at? What are you doing in terms of overlaying information that can help guide you going into the future? Amanda?
Yeah, so thank you for that question. I think that that's a main focus of the Biogen Foundation is how do we address equity and vulnerable populations. And so whenever we look at a grant application, we definitely take a look at what types of populations are they serving. This is something that we're taking into consideration even prior to COVID-19, because we want to make sure that there's equal access to everything that is out there.
Okay, terrific. Stacy, what kind of data is helping guide you? What are you looking to that is helping you in the decisions of this surge in granting from Cargill?
It's a great question, and I think it's one that we've actually incorporated into our normal grant application process, and then taking a step back with COVID, vulnerable populations, I think across the world has so many definitions, and so we wanted to be clear that, we were looking to serve vulnerable families and children. And so it was part of our metrics that we were looking. Right now, we are gathering information actually on number of individuals served and number of meals being served, and then using the appropriate index factor to help us quantify what does that really mean when we talk about number of families or number of individuals. And so we are just now gathering that information to be able to tell our story by the end of the couple of weeks here.
Terrific. And you are, what role does data on gender, race, other sorts of data play in the decision making now and here during this global pandemic and at the Citi Foundation?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely informs our decision making. Our grant making is by no means, gender neutral, race neutral, class neutral. So when we look at our grantees across the board, that's something that plays into the kind of decisions we make. And, we know that the impact of COVID-19 hasn't been equal across the board, and it disproportionately impacts those populations. And so as we think forward of how our grant making looks under this new context, that'll definitely be playing into the decision making, but also in a collaborative way, working with our grantees to ensure that we're working with them to support those populations now more than ever.
Terrific. Thank you. One last question before we wrap up this webinar. The question coming in again from our audience. Amanda, first to you. The three of you represent very powerful companies who are very, very successful and are successful grant makers. Do you lend your voice at all to the advocacy for policy changes that might help the role of philanthropy in other countries or anywhere around the world? What is the role of advocacy in your work? Amanda, quickly.
Yeah, so at Biogen, we definitely reflect our giving with our values, both in diversity and inclusion. We've been advocates in LGBTQ efforts. And as I mentioned before, our foundation has not been have a global footprint, and we are moving more into that. So I can see that there's definitely a place where we can play a role in advocacy globally.
Terrific. Stacy, advocacy and its role in Cargill's grant making.
Definitely, and it's interesting because we are our corporate responsibility teams are closely working with our government relations team to ensure if there's questions on upcoming policy changes, whether that be here in the States or other countries. So we are working very closely with our government relations team to ensure that they have our full story of what we've done from a community relations standpoint, and how can we be advocates in the communities in which we live and serve in.
Anwar Giordini over at Citi, wrap us up here with the role of advocacy in philanthropy for Citi.
Yeah, we see it as we have the role we see ourselves playing is one where we can be thought leaders, we can lead by example, we can provide a path, both for grantees, for other corporations, for other peers. That can be both through our foundation. We have been outspoken about increasing our giving in capacity building and flexible funding prior to COVID-19, and we'll continue to advocate that as that becomes more of a need going forward. And then for the company as well, I mean, it's taking a stand on different issues, or even in some cases, it's not so much about a stand, but as an example. I mean, just that one that comes to mind right now. A couple of days ago, Citi announced that they'll be using proceeds from processing the Paycheck Protection Program to support small businesses and CDFIs, and I think that's just one example of how the company can lead by example and show the different ways in which we can contribute to our communities.
And make a difference. Well, I want to thank Amanda Marville from Biogen, Stacy Smita from Cargill, and Anwar Giordini from Citi Foundation for joining us here on our webinar today. Thank you for joining CAF America. We will be back next month and continue to follow us at cafamerica.org for the most up-to-date information on how you can make flexible, impactful, using new models philanthropy during this global pandemic. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Ted.